offices is cast before the election even begins.
Yes, Your Honor, and that's consistent both with the way the federal government has consistently interpreted this, the federal courts, and sister states. A contrary interpretation would make Virginia a sole outlier.
You're listening to Richmond's Morning News with Rich Herrera on News Radio WRVA.
Those are some of the arguments that I heard yesterday while I attended the hearing at the Virginia Supreme Court. And it comes down to, what is the definition of the election? Is it election day or the entire election? And I'm sitting there listening to them parsing and talking about the Oxford Dictionary and this dictionary. It reminded me of the deposition of Bill Clinton, because basically we're having that same discussion. Remember when Bill Clinton said this?
The meaning of the word is. Yes.
The meaning of the word is. Remember that in his deposition with Monica Lewinsky? I felt like I was deja vu yesterday with the lawyers going back and forth. What is the definition of the election? Well, it's when people go out and vote. Oh, no, it's not, sir. It's only on election day. It's going to come down to semantics before the Virginia Supreme Court. One of the gentlemen that was in the gallery, I sat behind him, and to his left is Glen Sturtevant, state senator. He was on with us while I was out and Gary was running the show. He had an excellent rundown of what is going on with this referendum language and all the rest. And I asked him to join us today after the press conference that he and Ryan McDougall had after the hearing. And he's joining us this morning exclusively here on News Radio WRVA. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, Rich.
Appreciate you coming on with us. You've had a couple hours to think about it, and I'm sure people have reached out to you. Give me your thoughts on what we saw yesterday at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, when the Supreme Court originally took this appeal after we won the case in the trial court, and they, basically punted it until after the referendum vote, I was concerned about that, to be fair. I had hoped that the Supreme Court would decide the legal issues before the referendum came up and you had millions of people vote, but they, for whatever reason, decided not to do that. And that that gave me pause that if this thing ultimately passed as it did last Tuesday, that, they would sort of be in a bind and have to find a reason to uphold the vote. But as I've seen the briefing and now heard the arguments, with you yesterday in the Virginia Supreme Court courtroom, I'm becoming more and more cautiously optimistic that the Supreme Court may get the law right, get the facts right on this thing, and may very well overturn this. There were yesterday was what you call a hot bench, what a lawyer calls a hot bench. You had a lot of questions coming from several of the judges to both sides, but especially to the lawyer for the Democrats. I think, as you saw, they had to fly in a lawyer from California, not somebody from the Attorney General's office, but a private lawyer from California to argue the Democrats' case on the finer points of the Virginia Constitution, which I thought was kind of ironic. But yeah, long story short, I'm after yesterday, I'm feeling a little bit better about where things stand at protecting the rights of 48% of Virginians who voted no on this thing.
One of the big arguments, well, there are three arguments that I took away from yesterday. We're talking right now with State Senator Glen Sturtevant on News Radio WRVA in an exclusive one-on-one interview. The 3 points that I thought were the most interesting is the definition of what is an election. On the GOP side, and I'll just use that, so I use simple language so everybody can follow along. On your side, the argument is, well, 45 days I start voting, that's when the election is. On the Democratic side, representing the General Assembly, they said, no, it's election day, and everything we do before that, well, that really doesn't count. That's why I played the Bill Clinton cut, because it really goes down to the semantics is what is what is an election, what versus what is election day.
I had the same reaction as you did. When the Democrats' lawyers started talking about it, it all depends what the definition of election means. I thought of the same Bill Clinton quote. And you're right.
That's semantics. Now we're just playing semantics instead of actually talking about the law.
Well, I think it's really a farce that they're trying to push on the Supreme Court and on Virginians, that by saying, you can have 45 days of early voting, which the Democrats jammed through under Ralph Northam during COVID. You can have 45 days of early voting, but the Democrats want the Supreme Court to say that that's not an election. That's not part of an election, that the election is just the Tuesday in November, election day, and that anything that happens before that is not really part of the election. And I don't think there's any fair or reasonable reading of the Constitution or just a common sense understanding of what that means, especially in the age of 45 days of early voting and mail-in ballots that the Democrats started.
But there's one of the things, sir, that I thought was rather disingenuous, or maybe they actually said the quiet part out loud. I believe it was the Solicitor General of the Commonwealth said, well, if you vote early and something comes out afterwards, well, so sorry, so sad, too bad. To me, that's kind of a slap at the entire integrity of the election, that if you think, well, we're going to have these 45 days of voting, and if something comes out and you already cast your ballot, well, sorry on you. That's a big argument why we shouldn't have early voting.
Well, and it's also very different when you have, a candidate who passes away during the early voting period is, the example that he used. And that's one thing. But this is a situation that's very, very different. The Democrats unveiled this proposed constitutional amendment after 1 million Virginians had already voted in this last November's gubernatorial election. And we have a protection in place in the Virginia Constitution that you have to have passage of an amendment twice by the General Assembly with an intervening election. And they wanted to claim that the intervening election was this past November, even though the 1 million Virginians who had voted early in that election had no idea that this constitutional amendment was coming down. So, unlike at the federal level where you have to have a supermajority to pass a constitutional amendment, we don't require that at the state level, but we have these other protections built in where it has to be passed twice by the General Assembly with an intervening election, so that there is kind of a lengthy process. People can assess how their representatives voted up or down on these amendments before it comes to the people in a referendum, and they can vote that person out of office if they don't like how it happened. But that was impossible to have happened here. They didn't comply with those rules. And I think that ultimately is going to be, if the Supreme Court gets this right, is probably going to be the deciding factor in hopefully overturning this referendum.
Okay, I'm going to ask you something, and I'm trying to. I took a screenshot, or I actually took a photo when I went in to vote, because I voted early because we were out of the country. And I was kind of in shock yesterday when we were talking about a constitutional, I guess what's the proper word? This is a constitutional amendment, or we changed the Constitution?
Yeah, we were amending the Virginia Constitution, or the Democrats are trying to.
Okay. Did you see, and I watched just about every ad, and I stayed on top of it. I never once saw any ad that anybody ran for vote yes that said we were amending the Constitution. All I saw was, this is a temporary fix to stop Donald Trump. Nobody, not one person told me that this was a constitutional amendment. I didn't read it in a newspaper. We didn't talk about it here. And it struck me as, wait a minute, nobody's ever said that. And I'm trying to find my ballot right here. I don't think it was in there as well.
That's actually a great point, Rich. And I think that's
okay. I have it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I have it right here. Here's what it says.
Yep.
Should the Constitution of Virginia be amended? Okay. I mean, did anybody know that we were amending the Constitution, I guess?
Well, I think to your point, that was not the campaign argument that the Democrats and the vote yes people were making in any of their ads. You're right. It was all about, stick it to Trump. This is about restoring fairness, quote unquote. And so there are people out there who voted yes, and I didn't realize what it was ultimately that what they were voting yes on. Just like there were people who back in November voted for their delegate, and then they voted early for their delegate, found out the delegate later supported this amendment and wished they would have change their vote. And that's actually one of
because
the
all we heard is referendum. We never, that nobody once had an ad in there that's saying constitutional amendment. That's where I
Yep.
feel like, yeah, it's here in the ballot language, but it was never advertised that way. And I want to explain this properly. It was never in anything that anybody saw. It was never in any flyers. It's not on any poster, and it wasn't on the I don't know how many millions of dollars of TV ads.
Yeah, nearly $100 million from the yes side. And if there are folks out there who were misled, were confused, they should absolutely contact my office because we do want to talk to them and see if we can help them and they can help try to right this thing.
Well, what do you see now? I only have 60 seconds. I guess I wanted to bring this up. What's been the response? What have you heard from people? What have people reached out to you to say?
I spoke to a group down in Colonial Heights last night, and then I went to a local restaurant afterwards. And Colonial Heights is a small town, so you kind of know everybody. But it's remarkable how fired up people are still. People are not going to take this lying down. We're fighting this on several fronts in the courts. I'm hopeful and cautiously optimistic the Supreme Court's going to get this right in the relatively near future. If we have to keep fighting, we will. There's a lot of opportunity for litigation as this thing goes on. But like I said, people of all backgrounds, all stripes, all political persuasions, I think are recognizing and have recognized the farce that this is, the abuse of the process that this has been. And they are fed up with it. They're fed up with what the Democrats are doing now that they have control of the governor's mansion and the General Assembly. And so we're standing up. We're fighting them down there at the General Assembly. We need the people to help us.
Glen Sturtevant's been our exclusive guest here on News Radio WRVA. Don't forget, you can see this on YouTube, Facebook, and you can listen to it on our podcast as well. Sir, I appreciate the time. I appreciate getting a chance to catch up with you tomorrow. And let's stay in touch. And if there's anything you can share with our audience, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Very good. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you so much. Glen Sturtevant, our guest here on News Radio WRVA. I knew that the constitutional amendment was in there, and I didn't want to misread it. But honestly, tell me, it just kind of struck me like a thunderbolt. I saw all of those ads. You saw all of those ads. Did they ever say, hey, we're changing the Constitution? No, they said it was a temporary fix, not amending the Constitution. That, to me, that just after the fact just makes it more slick and feels like somebody who's trying to pull the wool over our eyes. I'm going to get your thoughts. 833-804-1140, the number for you to join us. 833-804-1140 here on News Radio WRVA. All right, let's talk about Pearson Automotive and that Pearson promise.